Today's lesson is going to be on oxygen debt and the response to exercise. We're going to cover three things. We're going to have a look at how your body responds to the increased demands put on it for energy when you exercise. We're going to look at why the amount of energy transferred from anaerobic respiration is so much less than that from aerobic respiration. And for those of you doing the higher tier papers, we're going to have a look at what oxygen debt is. Start us off, let's have a think about muscles. Your muscles are more important than you might think. Your muscles actually help to keep you alive. Without them, there are lots of things that your body would not be able to do. For instance, you wouldn't be able to move around, which seems like the most obvious one to look at. But you also wouldn't be able to support your body against gravity. You would just slump into a heap if you didn't have your muscles tensing to keep you upright. You wouldn't be able to pump blood. Your heart is made almost entirely out of muscle tissue. Without muscles, you wouldn't be able to pump blood. And you wouldn't be able to digest your food terribly well. By the process called peristalsis, food moves through your intestines. So your muscles are very important, and they require a fair amount of energy to do their job. When we say in science something is performing its function, we mean just doing its job. Muscles contain a lot of what we call mitochondria. Mitochondria, incidentally, is the plural. Mitochondrion, mitochondrion, so O-N on the end instead of an A, would be the singular. Mitochondria are the things that carry out the aerobic respiration inside your cells, and they are responsible for transferring energy to the muscles. They're known quite often as the powerhouses of the cell. So they are where the energy transfer takes place. They're the thing that's responsible for giving you all the energy that you need to do all the stuff that you need to do. The fuel that's required for aerobic and also anaerobic respiration is glucose. And your muscles need quite quick access to this. Thankfully, though, your muscles can access glucose very quickly, but it's not because glucose is stored in the muscles. In fact, glucose is not stored in the muscles. Instead, your muscles store something called glycogen. Now, glycogen is like a long chain of glucose molecules. This is a glycogen molecule, at least part of a glycogen molecule. And if you look very closely, each of these little bits are in fact individual glucose molecules just bonded together. So let's have a quick look at the glucose molecule again. That's a glucose molecule. And glycogen is just a whole bunch of those stuck together. So your muscles actually store this stuff. They store glycogen. And when glucose is needed, it's almost like it goes in with a pair of scissors and it chops out from the glycogen molecule individual glucose molecules for your muscles to use. Now it can do this very quickly, thankfully. So the glycogen that's stored in your muscles can be converted to glucose whenever your muscles need it to contract, to do what you need them to do. Now your muscles are going to use a certain amount of energy, even when you're not really doing very much. Your heart still needs to beat, your food still needs to move through your intestinal tract. You do still need energy, even if you're not really doing very much. When you do move, when you do exercise, your cellular respiration, the amount of respiration that your cells is doing, starts to go up. That means then that they're going to use more glucose and use more oxygen, and you're going to produce more carbon dioxide, which needs to then be disposed of. You need to get rid of that, and you get rid of that by breathing out. Three things will happen to you when you exercise. Three changes will occur in your body when you exercise. This is one of those moments in the video where you should pause it, have a think about what they might be. When you've had a bit of a think, you can unpause and see what the answers are. So pause now. The first thing that your body will do when you exercise is your heart rate will increase. So the amount of blood pumping through your veins and your arteries will start to go up. Your arteries actually will also start to widen. They'll start to dilate. They'll expand out to allow more blood to flow through. This means that you can get more oxygen to your muscles. And it also means that the carbon dioxide that your muscles are producing as the waste product of respiration can be taken away more efficiently. The other thing that starts to go up is your breathing rate. You start to breathe more frequently, and you also breathe more deeply, so you take in larger amounts of air. Obviously, that air contains the oxygen that you need for respiration. It also means that when you're breathing out, you're getting rid of more carbon dioxide, more CO2. The third thing is something that we've talked about already. Glycogen will be converted into glucose at a faster rate. meaning that the muscles can make use of the fuel that they've got stored. This is a graph that we need to be familiar with. In the first bit here, we have somebody who's resting. They're not actually doing any exercise at all. Their breathing rate is 15 breaths per minute, roughly. This dark blue line. And their heart rate is, what's that? Probably about 80 beats per minute. And once they start exercising, immediately their heart rate starts to increase. So their heart rate starts to go up really, really fast. But you probably notice that their breathing rate also starts to increase, but it doesn't start to increase nearly as quickly. So your heart rate changes quite fast. And also when they stop exercising, the heart rate starts to fall off quite fast. But the breathing rate changes more slowly. And this is because your muscles require the extra oxygen, so your heart starts to pump much faster. But there's already a fair amount of oxygen in your blood. So it's only when your body starts to think, oh gosh, this person isn't going to stop running around, we need to start getting a bit more oxygen in, that your body starts telling your lungs to breathe in a bit more oxygen for you. So your breathing rate starts to go up a bit later. And we're going to talk later on in this lesson about why the breathing rate takes such a long time to come down after you've finished exercising. But it's something called oxygen debt. So by increasing the heart rate and increasing the breathing rate, the supply of glucose and oxygen to the muscles will increase, and the rate of removal of carbon dioxide will also be increased. Any type of respiration would be an exothermic reaction, whether it's anaerobic or aerobic respiration, meaning that it will release energy. Now we need to be aware for aerobic respiration of both the symbol equation and the word equation. So let's have a look at these just to recap them. Glucose, and this is a picture of the glucose molecule, is combined with oxygen. And if you're going to balance the chemical equation, you need 6 molecules of oxygen for every 1 molecule of glucose. When you react those two things together, they become 6 molecules of carbon dioxide and 6 molecules of water. And they also release some energy, transfer some energy for you to use when you're contracting your muscles, for instance. Now, the way that I like to remember how to balance this equation, I like to think of this equation as the equation of the beast, 666, because it balances with 666. It is the devil's equation. Anaerobic respiration is also exothermic because it's a type of respiration, but it releases quite a lot less energy. The equation is a bit simpler. We actually only need to know the word equation. I'm going to put up the symbol equation as well because it's interesting to see it. But we only actually need to know the word equation for this one. So we have glucose, but we don't have any oxygen because it's anaerobic. The an bit means without. The aero bit means air. So without air, so without oxygen, the glucose on its own gets converted to something called lactic acid. I've put in the chemical equation so you can see it, but like I said, you don't need to actually know the chemical equation. It's just interesting to see. It also releases some energy, but it's only a little bit of energy. It's not very much energy at all, at least compared to aerobic respiration. When you're out playing football or you're running or you're doing any kind of exercise, you tend to be performing aerobic respiration. You're breathing in oxygen, that oxygen's going to your muscles and it's combining with glucose to produce energy. But after a while, the amount of oxygen being supplied to your muscles might start to fall. Maybe you're running too hard, your heart can't beat fast enough to keep up with the pace of exercise you're trying to do. And at that point, you're going to have to start doing anaerobic respiration. You're going to have to start respiring without oxygen. Aerobic respiration produces about 2,900 kilojoules of energy per mole. So if you have 1 mole of glucose molecules, you'll get about 2,900,000 joules of energy out of it by doing aerobic respiration. Now that is a pretty decent amount of energy. That's the reason why we're able to have enormous creatures like elephants and blue whales, because eukaryotic cells are able to do aerobic respiration and able to provide the energy needed for such big organisms to survive. Anaerobic respiration, on the other hand, though, if you have a look at the bond energies involved, only produces about 1% of the energy that aerobic respiration does, which is a tiny, tiny amount. So when you start to feel tired doing exercise, one of the reasons is that you're doing anaerobic respiration and the amount of energy being supplied to your muscles is really tiny in comparison to the amount of energy being supplied to your muscles when you're doing aerobic respiration. Your muscles will also start to hurt. They'll start to ache because lactic acid is building up inside them, and it's your body's way of saying, stop this, go and have a sit down. When we look at a molecule, what we see are atoms that have been joined together by something that we call a bond. So atoms that have been bonded together. This is a really simple molecule, just two atoms and a bond in between them holding the atoms together. If you want to perform a chemical reaction, the first thing you have to do is you have to break apart the atoms. You have to break those bonds to get your atoms loose and ready to be reshuffled into different molecules. It's a bit like, say, you've got a Lego plane in your bedroom and you want to take it apart because you want to make a Lego car. The first thing you're going to have to do is put in some energy to break apart all the bricks from the Lego plane before you can actually build the car. So in the same way, when you have a molecule and you want to react it with another one, the first thing you need to do is put in some energy in order to break those bonds, in order to break apart the atoms and have them ready to be reshuffled into different molecules. Now, the amount of energy that we put in to break those bonds, we call the activation energy. Energy is then released when new bonds are formed. So we have to put energy in to break the bonds, but when new bonds are formed, it actually releases some energy. So new molecules formed, energy gets released when those new bonds are made. With aerobic respiration, we get a lot more energy being released when those new bonds are formed than is needed to break the bonds. We have to put in some energy to break the bonds for the bits and pieces needed for aerobic respiration. But the amount of energy that we get out by forming those new molecules, the carbon dioxide and the water, is a lot more than the energy we've had to put in. So the net difference is huge. With anaerobic respiration, though, that difference is really small. We have to put in some energy to break apart the glucose, but when the lactic acid is formed, it releases just only a little bit more than the amount of energy that we had to put in. So it is still exothermic, but it's only just exothermic. The net energy difference is pretty tiny. Now, this next topic is just for people who are doing the higher paper. So if you're doing the foundation paper, please feel free to carry on watching. But it isn't something that you'll find you'll be tested on at GCSE. And it concerns something called oxygen debt. Now, what is oxygen debt? When you do anaerobic respiration, you produce what's known as an oxygen debt. So you're still doing respiration. You're still turning glucose into oxygen. But that lactic acid is building up inside your muscles. That lactic acid has to be broken down by something. And the way that we break down lactic acid is by reacting it with oxygen. When you react lactic acid with oxygen, you make carbon dioxide and water. So when you build up lactic acid, you're essentially going into oxygen debt. Debt, a bit like with money, is where you owe something. So you owe your body some oxygen. And the reason you owe your body some oxygen is so that it can break down the lactic acid, turn it into carbon dioxide and water, and get back to doing aerobic respiration. So oxygen debt is the amount of oxygen that your body needs in order to oxidize or react with the lactic acid and turn it into carbon dioxide and water. When you've finished doing exercise, the reason why you carry on breathing really deeply is because you are in oxygen debt. You still owe your body some oxygen. There's lactic acid that's built up inside your muscles, and your body needs oxygen, needs more oxygen than it's been getting in order to break it down into carbon dioxide and water. So there's a reaction that has to happen in order for the lactic acid to break down. The lactic acid has to be oxidized, meaning that it's going to be combined with oxygen. And when you combine lactic acid with oxygen, you form carbon dioxide and water. Now, we don't need to know the chemical equation for this one, and so I'm not going to tell it to you. But lactic acid plus oxygen becomes carbon dioxide plus water. That's how you get rid of the lactic acid in your muscles and enable your body to start doing aerobic respiration. To recap, there are a few things that we needed to know. Energy transferred from respiration allows your muscles to contract. So when you do respiration, one of the reasons you do it is to allow your muscles to do their job, which is to contract, allow you to move, pick things up, allow your heart to beat, your food to be digested, and so on. When you exercise, your body needs more energy. You're doing more work, so you're going to need to get more energy transferred or muscles. Your heart rate and the rate at which you breathe will go up when you exercise. This is to get more oxygen to your muscles and also to allow more carbon dioxide to be taken away. The other thing that your body does is it starts converting a lot more glycogen that's stored in your muscles into glucose. Remember, glycogen is the way that your muscles store glucose. They don't store it as the sugars, they store it as these strings of glucose all stuck together, and they can chop it up as and when they need it in order to use the glucose. If you exercise for a very long time, you'll start to feel fatigue. That word fatigue means tired. It's a similar word to the word in French, fatigue, which also means tired. As your respiration will start to happen anaerobically rather than aerobically. Anaerobic respiration, we found out, releases an awful lot less energy than aerobic respiration does. These last 2 points are just for the guys doing the higher papers. After anaerobic respiration, you go into what's known as oxygen debt. You owe your body some oxygen. And so you continue to breathe quite hard after exercise in order to get that oxygen into your body that you need to break down the lactic acid and form carbon dioxide, water again. Thank you for watching.